I'm joined today by Mike Canzoneri, Director of Technology Operations at Torch. Mike, thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
Because you've, for so long, built a career around building tech teams, and you've been involved in technology, and we know it goes without saying the role of technology how the role of technology has played such an important piece of our life given the last couple of months here. So I wanted to start today by Mike, getting your perspective on how you've effectively built technology teams in the past. Kevin Perl, our CEO here, has always described you as someone who's really been so brilliant and effective at organizing technology teams. So I'm curious how you've been able to do that. I know you've done that at Torch and in past roles.
Yeah, so so it's all very nice of you to say. So thank you. So there's a few things I look for when I put teams together, and so the first one is really when I think about technology projects, whether it's in my past roles as somebody who's doing professional services, servicing people who were entrepreneurs who are trying to build a new product, right? Or whether it's going into existing organizations or being in the one I'm in now, it's all about managing technical risk, right? And so you're trying to put a team together that's going to actually be able to succeed at the thing you're trying to do. Because for a lot of my career, that's been inventing a new product that hasn't existed before, right? It's especially the case when you're working with an entrepreneur and this is their dream and they're going to build something new. And it's the case for us at Torch, or building something that that hasn't existed before, right? And so you need a few components in people's personalities right out of the gate to do that. The first thing I look for in everyone that I hire, regardless of their skill level, is what I call them being a seeker, right? So someone who's seeking out problems and solving them. They're not someone who's necessarily sitting there waiting to be handed a problem to solve. And that's really important in this space, and especially when you're developing a new product, especially when you're trying to build an operations team that's within a company that's building a new product, because there's always problems that are gonna come about that need to be solved. So people who don't just wait for those things to happen, they're seeking out, anticipating problems, coming up with solutions, and actually putting them in place. And that's pretty easy to identify regardless of technical level. Beyond that, I always try to make sure there's a good mix of senior technologists in place. It's a really strong pull for an entrepreneur, especially in a situation where funding is limited, to hire junior engineers and to hire folks who are, they want to give them their shot. They seem pretty good. They're just out of school, and there is a tremendous amount of potential there. But again, when you're in a startup that's building something new, you're really increasing your risk dramatically, bringing someone in who is experiencing all of those things for the first time, whether it's technical challenges, whether it's the emotional and stress challenge of being in an environment like that. And so that's another thing is making sure that the deck is stacked with technical talent. And I'll often tell people who are in startups that you want to take as many almost unfair advantages as you can, right? And so everything else is against you, right? You're probably gonna whatever the venture is, right? It's probably gonna fail. The thing you're doing probably isn't gonna work, right? And it's really your belief in it and your ability to convince other people that it's gonna work that will help drive that success. And so you need to take those advantages, and you're disadvantaging yourself by bringing in a majority junior engineering side.
Yeah.
And then the last one is really being able to talk to clients. There's definitely a place for engineers who aren't necessarily the engineer that you would put in front of your clients, right?
Right.
The back of the house, they're a little bit harder to deal with, a little bit more socially challenged, and that's okay. And I have many folks that are around me that take that role on purpose.
Sure.
They want to talk to clients.
Yeah.
But you do need some number of those folks, because tying into those other things, the ability to seek out problems and solve them, the ability to work with somebody who has a product vision, the ability to work with those potential few customers that you have, or your existing customers and empathize with them, put yourself in their, in their mindset and understand what their problems are and how you're
Hmm.
helping solve them. Those are all things that you need to work on as a person. All right, everybody needs to work on
Yeah.
those things. But I found certainly for myself as somebody who's an engineer, you have to work on those things almost on purpose, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, you
so
seem like you've done a good job
you need that.
at that.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying. Try a lot of
Yeah.
work. It's still a
Yeah.
rough,
Yeah.
but yeah. So those are the things I look for when I'm putting teams together. Against whatever that particular project or team or company is.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, and it reminds me, I reference a lot. I take a lot of context from the business world, from the sports world. I grew up as an athlete, and it really sounds like one of the key things you try to do on a sports team is put people in positions where they're going to be effective and ensure that everyone knows their roles and make sure that those roles work together very well. So I guess I want to dig into the how you identify that. Is it just your experience over time of how you've learned to ask specific interview questions? Is there, I know that that's like an interviewer's dream, is like finding that person that's really curious and getting the feeling in the sense that they're not just saying that in the interview, but that's truly how they are. So, and you seem like you embody that combination of technical ability, but also quite personable and engaging. So I'm just curious to how you get to that decision point on a candidate or a person.
Sure. So there are a couple of things. Some of it is experience, and there have been people who have managed to get through, right? And despite having told all the right stories and have the resume and so on, when they actually get into the motions of doing the job, you find out this is not exactly what
Shoot.
we need.
Yeah.
And so having had that happen.
Hmm.
And knowing how to handle that is actually part of what makes the first process, a little more tolerable. You have to put yourself in a position where you're willing to accept that there's a chance that you're not making the right call,
Mm.
right? So that's kind of like the end of the question, but I'm saying it first, right? Um, when you're first meeting somebody new, there's usually a couple of things that I'm looking for. The first one is, did they come to me with a recommendation? Now, we're very advantaged in the Buffalo area. This is a very small area. And while
Sure.
we have a tremendous and growing amount of technical talent here, it's still really easy to say, who else have you worked with,
Yeah.
right? Who else can we talk to? What other projects have you been on? Who have you been spending time with, right? And you get to know, because it's such a small town, we're able
Sure.
to usually connect some of those dots. Without having that, it usually comes down to the stories that they're able to tell, and that gives me a couple things. One, it allows me to understand that they know how to convey a story,
Yeah.
and put those pieces together and really have a comprehensive delivery of what that messaging is, which plays into some of the other points that I talked
Hmm.
about before.
Right.
But really, I want to understand a little bit of their experience, how they solved the problem, issues that they ran into. And so I will usually, when I'm interviewing somebody new who has work experience, I'll spend some time going through with them the places that they've worked, tell me stories about how their organization operated, what their management was like, what the leadership was like, some of the challenges that they had interacting with clients.
Hmm.
I'll ask them about the market that they're in, which, again, spending a lot of time working with startups and working with entrepreneurs, you end up traversing many different industries and many different markets. And so I'll typically ask tell me about this market that the market of this company you were in, and what that market's like, who are your competitors, so on and so forth, to see what that understanding is of
Sure.
the overall problem space that they're trying to address. And so that's all important stuff. Technical skill set is important, but again, that tends to be the easier part to
Right.
evaluate, right? With
Sure.
some questions, with some
Absolutely. Yeah.
explanations of things that
Yeah.
have happened. With somebody who's just coming out of school, that's a lot harder. Oftentimes, somebody coming out of school doesn't necessarily have a wealth of work experience. There
Right.
are a few programs that have co-ops and things like that,
Hmm.
and that tends to make that job a lot easier. But if you have somebody where they're coming out of school, they have their coursework, maybe they have a few projects. Again, going back to the technical risk, that's a higher risk, right? That you're going to make the wrong call, and everybody's going to need onboarding and time to acclimate to the project
Sure.
and the particular processes and that. But somebody who's very, very green, it can be, I've made, excellent calls and super happy that I gave somebody a shot. And then there are other times where I've said like, this might not be, this might not be it
Yeah.
for you. And so let's
Hmm.
find something else. Right. And
Hmm.
that's a hard conversation to have, but the consequence of having somebody like that in a technical team is not just that you slow down, right? It creates gridlock and it creates stopping. It stops your people from moving forward. So you can never have somebody in a team like that, at least a small team,
Yeah.
small team with often limited funds, often with a short timeline, right? Whether it's 6 months or a year, 18 months. You can't have anybody on a team like that that's going to create work for other people and leave a path
Yeah.
of inefficiency or destruction. So that has to be addressed pretty quickly.
Yeah. No, that's good. And it's a good segue, Mike, into my next question and kind of area of focus for you is, I know tech companies have largely been ahead of the curve in a lot of ways when it comes to remote work. And I know that we are moving towards a future state where there might be almost 100% adoption of virtual work. As it relates to technical teams and the space that you manage, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I've talked to a lot of people about does this change things forever? Right? Are we always going to work from home? Are companies going to transition? And I think there's a couple sides to it. This has definitely accelerated the transition to acceptance of working from home,
Mhm.
forcing certain organizations and certain occupations. Medicine and therapy are tremendous examples of being extremely resistant, oftentimes for good reason,
Mhm.
right, to moving to a remote type environment. But at the same time, now you're forced to do it. So given that, we're seeing a lot of these challenges be overcome, mitigating techniques and strategies get put in place. Do I think that's going to replace it forever for everybody? I don't. There have been, historically, there have been other uh, events like this in the
Mhm.
world where people were displaced, where people had to work from home or abandon urban areas or whatever the case may be. And eventually things work their way back. What
Mhm.
I do think will stick around though is that acceptance that it's okay to work from home, that that it's necessary for the company or the organization to have the facilities and the process
Mhm.
and the culturalization around that in place so that people can work from home. And so I think the future, the distant future, not 6 months from now, but I
Yeah.
think the future as you get to 9, 12, 18, 24 months from now is more along the lines of the way dress codes changed,
Hmm.
right? So oftentimes you have the dress code of these days of dress appropriately, dress for your day, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing today, make that what you wear. And I think working from where it's appropriate for you to work today it
Cool way to
will
think of it.
ultimately be that transition in a lot of organizations. If you're sick, stay home, work from
Right.
home, right? If you have a big meeting today, if you have
Right.
do a big presentation, then come into the office. And for me, I'm very lucky to work in technology. I'm very lucky to be involved in an organization that is able to weather some of this storm that's going
Sure.
on. But even before that, that's how I operated my existing team. And there were times where I'd say, hey, we have a team meeting coming up. And this is true in our entire technology department. Right, we have an all hands meeting coming up. We'd like everybody to be in the office for that. If you're sick, stay home. Right. But if you can come in, then it's good to have everybody together.
Yeah.
And so I think that while that's been very easy and very normalized within the technology industry, I think we're really going to start to see that in a much more stable and consistent way in other industries where that was
Yeah.
less common. Banking, insurance, those are
Sure.
kind of the quintessential examples of that. Like,
Yeah.
well, it's okay if you work from home once in a while, and that's going to shift
Yeah.
dramatically. But
Yeah.
I don't think everybody necessarily moves to even an 80%. For most folks, 1 or 2 days a week working from home, that tends to be, the point where they're happy.
Mm-hmm.
And while there's certainly a set of people who only ever want to come in the office, there's a certain set of
Mm-hmm.
people that just love working from home. For the majority of folks, 1, 2, 3 days a week, but oftentimes people enjoy being in the office.
Yeah.
They enjoy being with their colleagues, and there is effectiveness to be gained there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've talked with so many people, and I think right now we're in the mindset of just trying to find what's the hybrid situation look like? What is that comfortable combination mix of being in the office and working virtually? And universally, people have just been really, I think, encouraged and so excited by the effectiveness of their teams, where they were once so resistant to, if you're not in the office, you're not working. And that's been, I guess, a refreshing just generalization that I've noticed across the board, is that we've been able to dispel that thought that physical presence equates to productivity, and that's not necessarily the case at all. So you feel like, just to close, I guess, what you feel like you've been able to maintain, I guess, this group collaboration, I really hate the word culture, but I haven't figured out another word to replace for it, but just the collaboration, the effectiveness of communication. You felt like you and your team have been able to maintain an effective way of doing that, even though you haven't had the 2 days in the office.
I think so, but I'm not going to say it's been without challenge.
Sure.
You definitely have to be more assertive about it. As a lead and as a manager, making sure that in addition, I do weekly one-on-ones with everyone who works for me, right? So in addition to those, making space in other meetings for some of the things that would happen in just sort of the presence of being in the office.
Right
there, I no longer have the opportunity to walk by the areas where my team works and say, hey, how's it going?
Mm-hmm.
So I make time in the other meetings that we have, where possible, to just say, hey, how are we doing? What'd you do that's interesting? How was your weekend? How's whatever thing you have going on at home going? And so you have to make that time to do that. There's also an advantage in having established that culture a little bit beforehand. Right? I have a team that had worked together physically in the same office space before this happened. So I suspect that's easier than what I have never experienced, which is building a completely remote team who's never all worked together, and then the level of intention has to be even higher to bring that together.
Right.
We've had a number of things in our company that I think a lot of other folks have had: virtual happy hours.
Right. Yeah.
Anyone who has either joined the company or has left the company, having those kinds of celebrations virtually. We had an intern leave the company. We had a virtual, send off, right? That kind of thing. So those are all those kinds of things that you just have to be more intentional about it. Sure. Lunch is another example. And then for the executives who really are even more disadvantaged, not being in the physical space, not being able to walk around and see the different teams working together, we have our leadership has had happy hours and lunches and things like that for and office hours, right? So I'm going to be on for an hour, this time of the week. If you want, show up, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so that to help kind of replace that, executive presence in the office, and I think that's helped a lot of folks.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it, that it has to be done with intent, and it has to make a truly deliberate effort to make up for the lost, just organic and kind of natural interactions that you would, which is obviously at this point pretty obvious to us. But this was great, Mike. What I really wanted, and I think we captured at the beginning, and I think what so many people look to you towards is the ability to build really successful and effective tech teams, and you articulated that well at the beginning of that conversation, and I think a lot of people will appreciate hearing that perspective. I know I did, because we try to help other organizations do that often, but just the acknowledgement that try your best to get it right, and you have to learn from when you don't is really key, and it's a process. So that was great. So thank you so much for joining today, Mike. Really appreciate it, and best of luck as we charge forward.
Thank you very much.